Yes. Okay, perfect. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in this insightful webinar workshop on IP and finance. Before leaving the floor to today's moderator, our IP expert, Elio De Tullio, I would like to present a little bit the project IP for SME. IP for SME is a project supported by WIPO and Ideas Powered for Business, and it's financed by the European Commission with the aim of creating awareness among the SMEs about IP regulation and how they can exploit intellectual properties to gain a strategic advance. If you want to stay updated on our activities, on IP for SMEs activities, please follow our LinkedIn page and Twitter page. And now I leave the floor to our expert, Elio, that will introduce our guest.
Thank you very much, Filippo. As you probably remember, my name is Elio De Tullio. I'm the founder and managing partner of De Tullio & Partners, that is an intellectual property tech law firm based in Rome, Italy. And I am the expert identified by ISME for this project and happy to moderate this discussion with the distinguished speaker, Brian Bass. First of all, some words about IP valuation. IP valuation is a technical assessment of companies' assets, and is one of the very important tools that companies, in particular SMEs, can use to monetize their IP assets. So it's very important to understand what is going on in Europe, but also on overseas, on the other side of the ocean. Of course, US is a leading country in IP valuation analysis methods, but also in Europe there are a lot of let's say there is a lot of interest on this topic. UIPO is performing some studies for let's say mapping the IP valuation providers and also what is the situation of IP valuation in European Union. Also in Italy, there is a great interest from the Italian Patent Office that some years ago in 2013 performed a research and issued a document containing a grid of IP valuation indexes for allowing companies and SMEs to perform a kind of self-evaluation of their IP assets. So there is a lot of going on in Europe, in US, and also in other countries. So the idea of this webinar is to listen from one of the guru of IP assets, Brian Bass from US. So Brian is a director with the CBIZ Forensic Consulting Group in San Diego. He's an expert in performing every kind of IP valuation for different purposes, damages calculations in IP litigations, or also using IP valuation for, let's say, financing companies. He works in all continents. He was also involved in several great, let's say, groups analyzing IP valuation at worldwide level, like the INTA Presidential Task Force on IP Valuation, and also in the same INTA, International Trademark Association, the Commercialization of Brands Committee. Brian, I will leave you the floor, and I will ask you to complete my presentation if is anything missing. And I will use this first question to ask you, what is the current situation of IP valuation in US, but also at worldwide level, if you can give us some hints, in particular in connection with the demand of services from SMEs. Of course, if you like to use PowerPoint, please, you are welcome. Thank you, Brian, for your participation to this webinar.
Hey, well, thank you for the very kind introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with all of you on the call. You know, like Elio mentioned, I am based in San Diego, California, although I do work with clients around the world. So, you know, my primary area of expertise is helping clients understand the financial contribution and value of their intellectual properties and intangible assets. So, you know, that's patents, trademarks, copyrights, and also things like the company's brand or their product brands, or sometimes it can be, you know, proprietary trade secret assets that the company has developed internally but has not elected to get intellectual property protection for. So I help people basically connect the dots between their intangible assets, their IP or their brand or their trade secrets, and how those assets contribute to the company's financial performance, how they add value for the company. So, you know, like Elio mentioned, you know, what are the current situation of IP valuation, or why is an IP valuation needed? You know, there's really three primary reasons that a company, especially an SME, a small to medium enterprise, would engage an IP valuation expert to measure the financial value of those assets. And that's for financial reporting. There's a lot of different reasons around the world, including in the US and in Europe, where if an asset or a company is changing hands, there's an acquisition, you need to do what's called a purchase price allocation. And for financial reporting, accounting or tax compliance, there might be a forced reason why the company would have to engage an IP valuation, right? In other words, the accountants or the regulators are telling the company they need that work done. The second, you know, primary reason is litigation, especially in the United States. As Elio mentioned, there's a lot of civil litigation in the United States that revolves around disputes over patents or trademarks or copyrights. And in any of those disputes, the companies involved in the litigation will probably need to hire a damages expert. And that damages expert is going to apply intellectual property valuation concepts to help the judge, the court, and the jury determine what the proper amount of economic damages are to resolve that litigation, right? In other words, how much does the accused party owe to the intellectual property owner as a result of the IP infringement? Or sometimes it can be a breach of contract. There could be a license agreement where then the parties end up in litigation and they need to sue to determine the value of the brand or the trademark or the patent. But kind of the more interesting reason that any business, including an SME, might engage a brand valuation are really to help them address strategic business decisions. And I think this is kind of the more interesting and the least developed and the least practiced area of IP valuation. But a good IP valuation analysis really helps the company's managers, executives, and investors and owners all get a better understanding of what assets and resources are driving financial performance at that company. Intellectual property assets are an investment. The company has to invest money, time, and effort to develop patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, and brands, right? And that investment requires a return on investment. If the company is spending money building a patent portfolio or a trademark portfolio, but not generating enough financial return on that investment, then the company needs to make some strategic decisions. If the company is going to buy another company, primarily what's going to be acquired is going to be the target company's intellectual properties. If the company is going to enter into a franchise or a license agreement and share intellectual properties, that requires a valuation and understanding of how those assets will contribute to financial performance. If a company is contemplating changing its pricing strategy, right? Or should we charge more or less for our products or services? That's a decision that can be informed by a good understanding of the company's patent assets or its brand assets and how those assets create a legal monopoly that might enable and support the company to change its pricing and get more profit from the products it's selling. So there's a lot of really key strategic decisions.
Sorry, Brian, if
am I running on too long?
No, it's fine, super fine. No, I mean, so the message is IP valuation is a good investment because it helps can help SMEs to take, and entrepreneurs, of course, managers, to take right decisions in terms of business development. So that is one of the points.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I really think that while there are kind of those reasons why an SME will be forced to get a valuation, intellectual property valuation should really be thought of more as a strategic tool rather than just a requirement. And then, if it's okay, Elio, we have a lot of people on the call, it looks like. I'm more than happy to start a conversation or answer questions. If people want to put questions in the chat, I think that's a whole lot more fun than just listening to me talk. So, I know you have some questions for me, but if other people have questions or comments or want to get a conversation started,
I'm sure that some questions will arise in the course of your speech. So no problem for that.
Yeah. So, instead of us trying to create a controversy and an exciting conversation, if other people have some good comments, we welcome that, right? Yeah, but your summary is straight on, right? Look, there are reasons why SMEs will be required to get an IP valuation, but really, I would like to kind of reiterate and tell the message that IP valuation can be a very helpful tool for small business strategic decisions. It can be very informative and help them make better decisions.
Do you see any difference from let's say, the demand of IP valuation services from the US perspective and, for instance, a European perspective or other jurisdictions?
Well, as everyone knows, the US is probably the leader in civil litigation. In other words, companies suing each other to resolve their issues. So in the US, there is a huge demand for the financial and economic analysis of IP assets from that litigation perspective. Now, I believe that some of the world is changing, and that there are more and more, when people say like infringe a trademark or a patent, there's becoming a greater area of practice around calculating economic damages and having the civil dispute resolved through the payment of damages. But it's really still that drives demand for IP valuation in the US, is that litigation perspective. There's a lot more, hey, let's value these patents because those patents are being litigated, than there is, hey, let's value those patents because we need to understand the best ways and the most financially astute ways to license those.
Well, one of the key points in IP valuation is that I always say IP valuation needs the involvement of several experts. Usually an IP attorney, also trademark or a patent attorney, and a lawyer, a market expert, so an analyst, and sometimes a CPA. And then all the information are gathered together, and then there are some outcomes that depend on the goals of the IP evaluation. But what I can see from the EU perspective is that while in US there are some tools even public tools that can be used, for instance, for retrieving some results in terms of, licensing agreements or others. For instance, those made available from the US Securities and Exchange Commission. In the EU, this, the tools available for experts are much less. And then, of course, also professional tools. So do you see can you elaborate on the importance of the instruments available for experts for performing IP valuation?
Yeah, one of the challenges of IP valuation is getting the data that you need to be able to inform your valuation analysis. And you're spot on in kind of mentioning how, a good valuation of the company's intellectual property assets involves a lot of different areas of expertise. It's a multidisciplinary practice, right? Because intellectual property is a legal right, so you need the input of legal professionals and what types of legal rights are conveyed by the IP that's owned by the SME. There's behavioral aspects, right? A trademark that protects the company's brand name or trade name is valuable because it creates awareness and recognition and memory amongst its consumers and customers. So those are behavioral aspects. How well do people recall and remember the name? What do they associate the name with? If you know of a chain restaurant and you see that restaurant in a new city that you're visiting for the first time, do you have a positive or a negative impression of that chain restaurant, right? Those are brand assets and the behavioral aspects of the brand. But then even more important, there's a financial aspect too. All of these assets required an investment to build and obtain. And the company who made that investment is hoping that they get a return on that investment through greater profits, greater revenues, more sales, less costs by leveraging their intellectual property assets. So, intellectual property is that multidiscipline, legal, behavioral, financial aspect.
Brian, there is a question in the chat.
Okay.
Which methods are most commonly used in order to produce the IP valuation analysis or report? Any standardized method or methods being promoted or used more intensively for evaluation brands and trademarks for purposes such as commercialization of brands? So this was also one of my questions. What about brands? I mean, evaluation of trademarks. Is there any specific aspect to consider? So thank you for the question, from the representative of UIPO.
Yep. So the common methods for approaching the value of intellectual properties are all going to be based on the same three common approaches to valuing anything: business, real estate, and that's the cost approach, the market approach, and the income approach. But when we're valuing intellectual properties, and especially when we're valuing brands, we have to make a few tweaks to those three standard approaches, right? So you can't use the same cost approach, market approach, and income approach. And here's why. Well, the cost approach basically says, what would it cost to replace that asset? In other words, if you, instead of buying a patent, could you do all the same research and development to create your own equivalent patent? But the problem is, for intellectual properties, these are supposed to be unique rights. In other words, no two patents are supposed to be the same. So the cost to replace an existing patent might not be a realistic indication of value because you can't get the same patent, right? You can't have the same trademark that somebody else has. So we often then, in these approaches, we have to tweak them a little bit to be more appropriate for intellectual properties. If you're measuring the value of a business, you're often going to use what's called a discounted cash flow model, an income approach based on forecasting the future earnings of the company and then discounting them back to a present value. And I'm sure, these are terms that just about everybody's always heard. Now, if you're going to do an income approach for a brand, You can't take the company's total revenues and profits and say that's the value of the brand. You have to figure out you have to do an extra step in your income approach. You have to figure out what portion of those expected future profits are being derived from the brand, as opposed to all the other assets and resources that the company owns. And then split up or apportion the total company's profits to be the profits that are specifically generated because of the company's brand assets. And that extra step makes the brand or IP valuation a little trickier. Now, for a lot of intellectual property assets, and this is kind of trying to answer the question too, one of the most common approaches to valuing patents or brands or trademarks is to use what's called a relief from royalty approach. And in this relief from royalty approach, what you're essentially doing is, let's say you have a small business, and that small business owns 5 trademarks that they use to protect their company name, their brand. Well, the relief from royalty approach values the asset as if the company didn't own that brand and had to pay somebody else to use the brand. So you create a hypothetical, theoretical licensing transaction where the brand owner would pay a royalty to use that same brand, and then value the projected future royalty payments, or sorry, you discount the projected future royalty payments to a present value to value the brand based on the hypothetical royalties the company would have to pay if they didn't own the brand. Now that's a
of course
kind of common approach.
So one of the key point is to, let's say, to select and to analyze the specific sector to which the royalty is referred to.
Yeah, and this is where a lot of these IP valuation tools come in handy. So if you're going to use the relief from royalty approach to value your brand, and I'll make an argument that there are other ways to do it, which can be equally informative. But if you're going to use that relief from royalty approach to value your patent or your brand, you would need to go do some research and get observations about transactions where other parties had licensed similar assets, right? So let's say my company, my small business, owns 5 trademarks and a patent, and we want to understand the value of our patent. Well, we would then need to go do some research to see if similar patents, like in the same technological field, or patents being used by similar companies, had been licensed by other companies, and what the economic terms of that license agreement are. We would then use that as a benchmark agreement to make an informed decision or a judgment about what we might pay to license our own patent, what royalty and fees we would pay, and then use the expected future royalty and fees to value our patent. Now, not all IP is owned and used or developed to be licensed, right? Most companies don't build up their brand assets with the intent of letting somebody else use them. So the relief from royalty approach, one of its limitations is that it has this hypothetical licensing transaction. And if you do the research to find other transactions, the only transactions you're going to find are those where a company was willing to license its intellectual property assets. So you have a kind of skewed population of observable transactions from which you can pull your licensing rate benchmarks. And that skewed population might give you a false impression of the value of your own asset, right? Because if I got a patent on my innovation and I want to use that patent to protect the products that I'm developing and the products that I'm selling, I'm not going to license that patent to somebody else. So using the relief from royalty approach that's based on observations of patents that have been licensed could give me a false impression of the value of my patent and how it benefits my business by protecting my innovation from somebody else selling a product with a similar innovation. That was clear as mud, right?
Yeah. Brian, one of the very common question is there any difference between IP rights? I mean, between title IP rights, like, I mean, rights that are submitted to filing registration process, like trademarks, patents, designs, and untitled IP rights, like, you know, trade secrets, know-how, or unregistered designs, or unregistered trademarks. I mean, is there a qualitative analysis that can have an influence on the evaluation and even on the economic number that is, you know, that comes out from the evaluation?
Well, and my answer might be a bit US centric because I am more familiar with this in the US since I am based in California. Owning the trademark registration or the patent or the copyright registration is going to enable the company a smoother path to enforce those rights through litigation, right? If you have a common law right to a business name, it's going to be more difficult for you to stop somebody else from using that same name. But if you have obtained the trademark registration, your path to litigating and preventing someone else from using that name, in other words, enforcing your exclusive right, is going to be easier. Therefore, a brand will be more valuable if the trademarks, the names are registered, if you have trademark and copyright registrations to protect it. Remember, we talked about how the multidisciplinary aspect of IP valuation, the legal, the behavioral, and the financial. Well, this is really the legal aspect of it, right? In other words, if those rights are valid and enforceable, all things being equal, that bundle of assets should be more valuable.
Yeah. Well, then, of course, if you go on the ground, there are a lot of nuances, a lot of gray zones that to consider when you perform the IP evaluation, even in consideration of the different methods.
Well, and as everyone knows, obtaining those registrations requires time, effort, and importantly, money, right?
Yes.
So there's a cost-benefit analysis, right? You know, you have some rights to your innovations and names and brand without legal registrations, but all things being equal, a company that has obtained those, you know, registrations and legal rights should have more valuable assets.
Well, of course, we invite all participants to ask questions, to put questions in the chat. So thank you for those who already made it. Waiting for your questions.
I guess one other thing, if I don't answer your question well enough, let me know so I can get a second chance to answer your question, right? We don't want to leave without answering your question well.
There is another question. What would be a reasonable average cost for an SME to commission an IP evaluation report that has some chances of success in, for example, seeking financing for a project from a commercial or investment bank?
Well, interestingly, I think if a commercial or an investment bank is going to be financing a company based on the value of its IP, it's likely that that bank will be doing its own valuation analysis as well. But remember, if you're hoping to use your intellectual property assets as collateral, the value of those assets as collateral is a little different than the value of those assets if you're using them to generate cash flow for the business, to protect the business. Because the bank only seizes the collateral if you're unable to repay the loan, right? So, and if you're unable to repay the loan, it probably means you weren't generating enough cash flow to repay the loan and something bad happened to the business. So the intellectual properties that the bank gets as collateral are going to be somewhat, for lack of a better word, damaged, right? They're not strong brand assets or strong patent assets because they weren't strong enough to help support a healthy, growing, profitable business. So the bank will have a slightly different perspective and context for valuing your IP than the business owner. The bank wants to know the value of the IP if they have to sell it as collateral if something's gone wrong. Whereas the business owner wants to understand how the IP will contribute and create additional cash flow. So I think that really the question should kind of be rephrased as, what would I need to pay to get some help to be able to present and communicate the value of my IP to my business so that the bank can be more confident that I'm going to be able to generate enough sales, profit, and cash flow to repay the loan. So, you know, we're here talking about getting an IP valuation analysis, but what this really is a kind of a communication piece that helps explain the benefits of the IP to the business, right? In other words, we have patents that protect our innovation that enable us to charge a higher price for our products because we're the only ones who can sell a product with these patented features. And that higher price is going to enable us to generate more sales at a higher profit margin and therefore have more cash flow, right, to be able to repay the loan. So you, the lender, don't have to take our assets as collateral, right?
Yes, well, this is always an issue because SMEs always try to, let's say, get the most with the the lower. I mean,
yeah.
So I mean, and this is probably is not the case for IP valuation because once again, it's not an easy task and needs you know, a lot of expertise to be
it's
done.
Not the report you'd want is not, hey, my patents are worth $100 or $100. The report you want is, hey, investor, or hey, lender, let me show you why my patents are important to my business and enable us to be more profitable than other businesses that compete with us. And I think, you know, to really answer the question, you know, to hire an outside party, someone even like myself, to do that work for you is probably going to be somewhere in the, you know, $20,000 to $50,000 range, depending on what the assets are and who the investor is and what their requirements will be. But it's a really simple report in a way, in that if you focus it on not what is the numerical value of your patent, but what is the financial contribution that you get from your patent? Because what you really want to communicate to the banker is, I'm a safe place to lend your money because I have special assets that will enable me to generate more cash flow. And in a prior life, I was a banker. I did commercial loans for businesses. And you know, you don't want to go back to your credit department and say, hey, we're going to lend money to this company because we'll get their patents at the end of the day. The credit officer is going to go, don't make that loan. Right? You want to make the banker, the credit officer, wants to see a very solid explanation of how this company is uniquely situated to generate enough cash flow to repay the loan.
Yes, yes, very clear. Of course, if you are not satisfied with the answer of Brian, please, you know, go further with your questions.
I mean, and I know one of the questions we were going to discuss is kind of like, what are misperceptions of IP valuation? This kind of, I know we're jumping to the end.
Brian, before arriving there, I would like to ask you another questions in the chat.
Sure.
That is, I mean, and then of course, I will use this question to go a little bit further with my question. So the question from the audience is, when a company develops a new tech and patents it, are there tools or services this company can use to evaluate these new patents? Are there also resources that this company can use in order to understand how much this new patent could be licensed for? So of course, here the question is related to, let's say, an independent and self-made evaluation, let's say.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are tools and there are services or people like me, but there are tools that we use, and those tools are available to everybody. So a couple of the tools that I would kind of refer people to, unfortunately, those tools are not free to use. They're expensive. But there are services like Royalty Stat, Royalty Source, and another one called KT Mine. So that's KTMINE. These services or these tools are databases of intellectual property licensing transactions. So what they do is they gather information about companies that have reported a patent or a trademark license. And then they let you, the user of that tool, search their database by industry or company type or intellectual property description to see if you can find similar or comparable agreements. So we'll call them guideline agreements. We call them, guideline transactions. And from those guideline transactions, you can get information that would help you understand guideline, similar transactions that have occurred in the marketplace. Right?
Brian, but one of the flag of my experience is that sometimes there is no strong wind that can help the sailor that doesn't know where to go. So are these tools really, useful if you don't have an expertise in IP valuation? Is it feasible according to your expertise, the self-made evaluation?
I think if you learn to use the tools efficiently, you can get some useful information. But I would like to caution anybody about just, if you go in there and you search and you find 5 agreements and you take the average royalty rate, and then you hope and pray that you will be able to license your patent for that same royalty rate, you're probably wrong. Especially the example that was provided there where it says, you're a new company and you have a new technology and you patent it. Well, those databases of transactions are probably not going to have a lot of comparable agreements for a brand new technology, because these are patents that have existed for a while and a company is licensing them to somebody else. So the technology tends to be a little bit older, especially for patented technologies. And 2, the companies that are able to do those licensing transactions are a bit more mature. They've been around longer. They have more history. So a new company trying to license a new technology is not going to find very good guideline transactions in the licensing transaction databases. And it's a little bit of, comparing an apple to an orange. That new company might have the apple and all the transactions are oranges. Is it fair? Yes, they're both fruit, but is it still fair to say that they're the same,
Thank you, Brian. So then some participants asked to write, these names on the chat. So afterwards, probably you can do that.
The databases.
Yeah, the databases.
Okay. I could write them in the chat if you want. Or
but what is the usually according to the US perspective, what is the profile of the companies that request IP valuation and IP valuation services? This is also to give SMEs and intermediaries connected in this event an idea about what are the ideal recipients of this message in order to multiplicate the message for, let's say, reaching out, more demanders.
Sure. In the US, a lot of the companies that request IP valuation, especially smaller businesses, is because they're in litigation. They're either hoping to sue somebody or they're getting sued for IP infringement. And so they're kind of forced to get a analysis of their intellectual property assets because of the litigation. But, there is a growing interest amongst investors to better understand how a company's IP enables that company to generate cash flow and therefore become a strong investment. So there's a growing interest in, companies that are seeking outside investment to be able to tell the story about how important their IP or how valuable their IP is to their business operations. And I think that's kind of the really exciting area around IP valuation is, once again, not just getting a valuation for the purpose of getting a valuation, but for the purpose of being able to tell your investors and your stakeholders how that IP drives financial performance at your business so that you give a more transparent and provide a better understanding of how important your IP is to your business. So, I see IP valuation really as a tool to help unlock the secrets that make a company successful rather than just, hey, give us a number for the value of our IP. It's the story of how that IP is important. And, the more SMEs that kind of get the opportunity to present to their current investors or their potential investors, and if they can focus that presentation and story on the proprietary and unique assets that they own and connect the dots for their investors between owning the IP and using the IP to drive more profits, then I think those companies will be more successful at getting more investment from their investors, but also have a better understanding of what makes their company successful and be able to make better strategic decisions going forward that complement their strategic strengths.
Thank you again, Brian. I don't know how familiar you are with the Armenian market, but we have a specific question on Armenia. But of course, you can refer to also to other countries in order to, let's say, to depict the panorama. So can you advise how can SMEs in Armenia effectively leverage their IP to access financing, particularly given the unique challenges like a small domestic market, limited international market, regulatory and legal barriers? Particularly given the unique challenges of Armenian market and legal framework.
Now, I am not an expert on the Armenian market or the legal challenges of Armenian companies in obtaining or leveraging their IP. But I have worked with some other companies in other small markets. And, one of the challenges can be if you're based in a smaller market, you're more likely going to need to also seek intellectual property protection in other markets. So I imagine if you're an Armenian-based company, you would probably also want to consider, patent or trademark protection in the European Union or in other neighboring markets, just so that you can expand the protection of your innovations beyond your small market.
Yeah.
So, if I was going to value a company in Armenia and I was specifically going to value, say, their trademarks or their patents, I would want to understand their strategy towards obtaining additional patent or trademark protection in neighboring markets as well. Whereas in the United States, a company can be small and not have to worry about, expanding into non-US markets, because the US, or, if you're a European Union member, you're going to have access to bigger markets through one IP regulatory body. But small companies in smaller markets have the added challenge of identifying and getting protection in those secondary markets that they want to be able to operate in.
Okay, great. So also Armenia is covered by your expertise. There's
Well,
another
not
question.
really. I can only give kind of the general answer, but yeah, I would not want to say that I'm the expert in Armenian IP prosecution.
So the other question is related to, let's say, different sector. So SMEs and startups can be specialized in different things. So a jewelry brand, for example, will require different things compared to a new app or a video game. How do I choose and understand which is the best path? I assume the best path for evaluation according to my field. So probably, I try to rephrase the question. What is the best method, related to each field or each sector? If any, of course.
From experience, I think a lot of companies that are focused on developing new products through new technological innovation concentrate and focus on patent protection. And while that's certainly, appropriate, I would say don't forget your trademarks and your brands, especially, for both your total company name, but also protecting the product names that you have. In other words, you might be developing a total jewelry brand under one house name, but then have separate names for different types of jewelry products. And the simple way to kind of think about it is a patent has a limited life, and a patent is very specific. It has to protect something that you've invented, your innovation, whereas your brand could last forever. And if you don't invest early in that brand, there's a good chance that somebody else might start using a name that's too similar to yours and causing confusion. So, getting protection for the names, well, even stepping further back, developing a strategy so that your use of your company name is consistent and and precise. In other words, you identify what people want to associate with your name, right? If you're a jewelry brand, are you going to emphasize the range of options, or are you going to emphasize quality? Are you going to emphasize, good looks at a good price? What is it that your brand is going to stand for? And then consistently using that messaging to create an association between your name and what you want your name to mean to your customers. You need to have that strategy early so that you're identifying the right trademarks to go get legal protection for, but also so that you're generating a consistent message for your consumers so that they know what you stand for, right? These are the behavioral aspects, right? If your jewelry brand is going to be all about, environmentally friendly products, you better make sure that everything you're doing resonates with that brand message and that you have protection for those names. So, don't forget the branding aspect, because companies often get in trouble and lose their way when they're constantly shifting what they stand for or what their messaging is.
But what are, according to your view, the most common misunderstanding and misconception about IP valuation? So why, how we can, we as network in ISME, but also the other networks, the other intermediaries that are connected online today, how can we push the demand of IP valuation services? And if there is any once again, any misunderstanding or misconception?
Well, I think we talked about the biggest one, that it's not only for regulatory compliance. I think that the perception of IP valuation is you got to go get it done when you're getting sued or when the tax authority tells you to, rather than seeing IP valuation as the story that helps explain how your IP is creating value for your company. And, that misperception leads to kind of an underuse of IP valuation. If we think of IP valuation more as telling your stakeholders, telling your investors and your customers what your IP does for you, then you're making your company sound more unique. You're making your company more interesting to investors. You are helping drive demand for your IP protected products, which should all create additional revenues and profits and cash flows for your company. So, if I had one message that everyone should take away is IP valuation is not the number that you get. It's not your IP is worth $100. It's the story of why your IP is worth $100.
Yes, yes. Well, it's a very good takeaway. Now I would like to go a little bit further, and also speaking about my experience. It was not easy to let's say to involve all stakeholders in IP valuation discussion. And one of the stakeholders, some of the stakeholders that are not easy to involve, at least in European Union or in Italy in particular, is let's say the world of banks and that let's say can be the recipient of IP valuation and IP valuation from companies for using IP as collateral for giving financial support to SMEs. So is there any way you can see that can be used in order to facilitate the discussion and the involvement of investors and banking services in this IP valuation let's say world? Because sometimes they are reluctant to consider IP
to try new things, right? Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, investors can be reluctant to try new things sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at least this is the Italian perspective, and also in some other countries in European Union, more or less there is the same perception. So probably the US perspective is different.
Yeah, and I suspect that this perspective is different, not just from the US and Europe, but everywhere around the world too. But at the end of the day, if you're an investor, in other words, you're buying equity in a company, or if you're a banker, you're lending money to a company and you want that money to be repaid, you're looking for a quality company that's going to generate cash flow so that you get a return on your investment, right? If you're a lender, you want the company to be able to repay the loan. If you're an investor, you want their profits to grow so the value of the business grows. And I think, both company managers and owners and executives and investors, meaning, equity investors and lenders, will all benefit if the conversations they have about matching money, matching investment with the companies starts to focus more on the proprietary assets that business owns. Traditionally, the analysis has been focused on the total company revenue and profit, because that's what's reported in the company's financial reports. The accounting statements show sales and costs and expenses for the whole business. But if both the company managers who want the capital and the investors who have the capital include in their discussions, okay, what IP does the company own that is going to create future cash flow? It will create more interest in both understanding and managing and leveraging proprietary assets or IP, but also the benefits of investing in those companies who have made the investment to protect their proprietary assets through IP rights. So, it really kind of takes both sides of that equation, changing the conversation to talk about not just what is the business, but what IP assets make the business work and what IP assets will make the business successful going forward.
Well, yes, we hope that also these initiatives can help to let's say to disseminate the message and to
Well, I
let's
mean,
say raise the awareness on IP evaluation services, because sometimes IP evaluation is the only way we have to connect IP with you know, receiving money rather than spending money or investing money. And this is
IP is expensive. It requires an investment, right? You can't get IP without spending some money.
Yeah.
Now,
and
but if you're going to spend the money, you better make sure that you're getting the most out of that investment, and making sure that you're using your IP to, you know, get a better price for your products or save some marketing and costs, right? You know, IP is all about, it should be, you own the IP and then you invested in the IP because you want to improve your financial performance. So you got to be able to connect the dots and say, okay, we use this patent to get a better price, and that gives us more profit on these products. And I think that kind of answers the question that came up too, like what strategies or best practices would I recommend overcome and identify the difficulties in identifying your IP? Well, it's really about map your IP to the products that you sell. And then once you've mapped the IP to the products that you sell, do the financial detective work to see if you're best leveraging that IP to get a higher price or sell more units or save some costs. Because if you're not doing one of those three things, getting a better price, selling more volume, or saving some costs, why do you own the IP in the first place?
Yeah, that's true. There is another question that is in some way connected. What strategies or best practices would recommend for SMEs to overcome the difficulties in identifying and categorizing their IP, especially when many businesses may not realize they have valuable IP assets?
Yeah, it's that connect the dots. You know, you and your IP attorney, whoever's helped you obtain your patents or your trademark, should be able to generate a quick list of the patent, trademark, and copyright registrations that your company owns, right? Make sure that you are updating that list. You know, it's not a static thing, right? And then map that list of your IP, your patents, your trademarks, and your copyrights to your products, right? Do you own a bunch of trademarks that you don't use anymore? Well, why do you still own them, right? Do you have patents that are no longer related to the products that you're selling? You know, why do you still own them?
So at the end of the day, the message is don't use your registration certificate to put it framed in your room like you know like an award.
It's supposed to be a living, valuable thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's not just for framing on the wall. It's supposed to be, you know, enabling you to sell at a higher price or sell more volume or save on your costs. It's got to have some financial benefit.
Well, this is the last call for any other question. Of course, I would like to thank you all participants about their questions. Very interesting. That made this webinar quite interesting. Very active for our speaker, and we are happy that Brian Bass managed to stimulate your curiosity, your attention, and received so many questions. So we are very happy for that. Of course, Brian, feel free to write on the chat, you know, the references of the database you mentioned. In the meanwhile, I will give the audience some, let's say, reminders about the next appointments. Well, I would say the last webinar that is included in this journey, IP for SME, that is managed by ISME, the International Network of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. So next webinar will be on Wednesday, 11 September on IP and technology transfer. So stay tuned. You will receive an email from the Secretariat of ISME, and you will be able to also to register to this webinar and to listen to other distinguished speakers. So you will receive shortly the program of next webinar. And I would like to thank you for your attention. And of course, I would like to thank you, Brian, for your valuable contribution in this webinar. Of course, we really appreciated your availability so early in the morning, because Brian is connected from San Diego in US, and also the availability to answer to all the questions of our participants. So once again, we'll say that the takeaway message is connecting the dots and using IP for your business goals. Thank you again, Brian. I don't know if you'd like to say a few final words.
No, I think we covered a lot. So I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been a fun conversation, and thank you everyone for the questions, which were very interesting and diverse. So it shows that all everywhere around the world, people are grappling with the same issues. How do we tell the story about the importance of our IP? So hey, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been great speaking with you, and I did put those tools in the chat, so I've listed those there. Yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, Brian, and of course you all can find Brian Bass contacts and details on LinkedIn. And we'll keep in touch for next webinar on Wednesday 11. Thank you. Thank you, Brian.